a Met committee heard, I think it was last week, discussion of potential changes in the various Colorado River agreements that relate to water for Mexico. And although there are contracts and division, Ms. Gray, I don't know if you're on that committee that heard the report, but there were some really interesting news reports that follow up. There's something called minutes, which is, I guess, a word for an interim agreement that affects water distribution that will attempt to make further accommodations of international complications on the Colorado River. Again, a distant activity, but tangentially of very great import to what we do tied to the Delta, because the expectations and demand of Colorado River water also relate to expectations of demand in Delta water. Okay, Hank.
There was an alarming article in the New York Times yesterday about the Central Valley and about groundwater contamination with nitrates, arsenic, and bacteria.
Right.
And the fact that the economically disadvantaged who were in the area, immigrants, had to buy water for drinking, for brushing their teeth, and other things, and the economic hardship that causes.
Yeah. Yes, as a matter of fact, the state agencies from DWR to I think it's Department of Health and others have been spending time on disadvantaged communities. There are a number of smaller communities without an adequate water supply system, not exclusively in the South Central Valley, but heavily there. And the problems are damned complicated. And some of the communities are, essentially they use bottled water because their supply is not safe. One of the devices California's used historically had been, starting in the 70s, what are called Clean Drinking Water Act bond funds. Well, of course, that's such a popular sounding title that the definition of what falls within clean drinking water tends to expand. But it used to be we were rolling out $100 million or $200 million spotted at targeted areas of insufficiency, but that pattern has not continued because we've started to use bonds for a host of activities as opposed to just clean drinking water. There would be potentially some funds in the 2014 bond that might apply. But Randy actually knows a lot of it. It's damned expensive to clean up a drinking water system, particularly if it's reliant on underground sources, because you're running pipes miles and miles and miles and miles if you're using other supplies.
Yeah, they're talking about putting in some sort of a filter underneath some of these catchment areas.
Yeah.
To filter out the.
Well, it's complicated, Randy.
Yeah, but it doesn't look good for California. I mean, this is the New York Times and sensationalism, but I'll send copies to the committee members around.
The prospects for drinking water quality to be upheld in the San Joaquin Valley are grim. Historically, groundwater supplies south of Modesto were from surface to about 150 feet. That profile has been polluted by mostly nitrates, and so now they're going below the Corcoran clay level to the 250 to 300 foot level, and they're finding arsenic. And it's hard in our area to drill a well at that level and not exceed the allowable level of arsenic, which is 10 parts per billion. The EPA is considering lowering that to 5. And when that happens, there's unlikely to be a well drilled in that part of the state that will meet those requirements. So the future is a surface water supply. A surface water supply, and that's why oftentimes when folks have come before us and talked about the need to reduce reliance on the Delta, I continue to remind them that there are a number of small communities, particularly along the west side of the San Joaquin Valley, that their only hope is to receive a treated surface water supply, because the cost is prohibitive to clean up arsenic and nitrate for small communities.
Just arsenic alone, would the cost be prohibitive?
Yeah. For a community of 4,000 to 5,000 people. Yeah.
Well, I think the Times were concentrating on communities of 300 or 400.
They had 300 people in the community, name of which I'd forgotten. But yes, that is a repeat of stories that have been talked about for some time in California. Real dilemma. Very confident.
Now, are we involved in this at all, or even tangentially?
The answer is yes in supporting the activity, but because most of the water supplies in California are delivered by local water agencies, just like most law enforcement action is by local agencies, the state involvement has typically been setting standards and providing some subsidies periodically, mostly for capital improvements. But that becomes increasingly hard to do when you've borrowed so much money for a host of reasons. Don has worked on this too.
Well, I would just say on the arsenic standard, we face this in the Delta communities. In fact, we are working on an upgrade to the water systems that provide water to the town of Walnut Grove. Because it's not so much that the arsenic has increased in any concentration, is that they've changed the standard. It maybe they've made other findings related to health or cumulative health issues, but when that standard went to 10, that triggered a whole lot of communities who have community water systems no longer being in compliance. And I know we're making a major investment in Walnut Grove and working with some of the other communities, both in Hood and in Cortland, that have private water systems that are just below that threshold. But as Randy said, if they move it to 5, it doesn't necessarily mean there's any higher concentrations, and it doesn't ignore what maybe additional findings are regarding health impacts. But it just, the costs are, you're talking, millions and millions of dollars, I'm sure, in Central Valley, but, I know what it's costing us in Walnut Grove and in Hood. We're doing a phase where we have very small systems that serve, 75 customers or 200 customers or hookups, but maybe more folks. But, and the investment is just incredibly challenging to do that at any level. And so I think I didn't see the article, but I know that, again, right in the Delta itself, where they rely on the groundwater, it's not the surface water, and this council's well aware of that we drill wells there as well, that those arsenic levels, that particular threshold really has, I think, challenged local entities, big and small, up and down California.
Earlier this year, the governor signed legislation which was controversial. I forget the bill number, Jessica may remember it, but it's kind of establishing a human right to use water. Not a commercial right, but an individual right. What it means is legally unclear. But I would expect you'd start to see the legislation crop up in litigation as attempting to trigger an obligation by someone to do something and pay for it. And of course, this is the water discussion is well exemplified by the discussion when the legislature this year, and the governor agreed, proposed a firefighting fee on property owners who live in state-protected areas that receive fire protection. And of course, that has led to another one of the explosions of indignation that a $150 fee for the state to provide what is otherwise municipal fire service should be done. Everybody's in favor of the protection, but a lot of people are not in favor of paying for it. And it's a real dilemma.
Just on that, since you've got on that subject, because I have areas of my district that got hit with that, but where they actually have a local fire protection that actually is the first responder, even though the state may respond, it becomes very controversial up and down the state. And I know that there's, but I think it's an example of where you try to find some revenue source and it becomes very, very contentious.
Yep. All right. Okay.